Hello, this is William. This is going to be part 2 of our big episode on violence. Because we always want to have frank and clear discussions, we're going to talk about some stuff that's kind of difficult. If that's something that makes you uncomfortable, this is your fair warning to back out now. But I do hope you'll stick with us, because I think that it's worth talking about. So, there you go. All right, so what's our...
So, first we're just jumping right into suicide since we
All right,
didn't have time to do that.
Talking about suicide.
All right, let's touch on suicide. So,
Don't do it. Don't you do it.
moving on. No, so
I would say that, in the words of Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, he says that suicide is a rejection of everything. It is a refusal to look at a tree and find it beautiful. It is a refusal to enjoy a cup of coffee. It is a refusal to love your fellow man. It is a refusal to participate in the creation that God said was good. And for that reason, it is a great sin, because it is a complete rejection of everything.
okay.
And I think that Chesterton is on to something there, even if he lacks sensitivity toward the hardship for people that are contemplating or actually trying to commit suicide, because people don't do that when they're well.
Yeah.
It's a function of suffering for people to end up going there, you know?
Yeah. I think Chesterton's probably onto something there. I'm gonna keep bringing this up just because I finished it recently and it was a good read, and I have an unhealthy obsession with Bonhoeffer. I'm sorry.
Even though he's Lutheran?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though.
And we don't hold that against him.
No, and to be fair, there are some things in that book that he says that I do disagree with because of his Lutheran view.
I would almost be more interested to hear you talk about that, but
Yeah,
that's not what we're doing today.
Some of it, in my opinion, is a little bit off because of that. Most of it, I'm fully on board with, though. I think he's right about most of it. He has a whole section on suicide in Ethics that he discusses. And the argument he makes, I think, is equally not as sensitive as Chesterton's, but equally correct, I think.
Okay.
Which is, by definition, suicide is self-murder.
Right.
One of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder. Therefore, suicide as an act is a blatant disregard for the 10 Commandments, is in opposition to the 10 Commandments. Therefore, by committing suicide, your final act is one not only of sinfulness, but one that is in opposition to the 10 Commandments, and therefore that is why the Christian does not commit suicide. And I think he's right.
I think he is close to being right.
Ooh. Okay, hit me.
The 10 Commandments are great. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
I'm definitely pro 10 Commandments. Big fan of them. And we get different commandments from Jesus, which all the other commandments fit inside of, like Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that Bonhoeffer's wrong for appealing to the 10 Commandments, but someone who was uncharitable and wanted to argue against him might be like, oh, well, we're not bound by the Old Testament anymore, bro. We're under the law of grace.
Wrong. So...
Wrong that we're not bound by the Old Testament?
No, so something that person...
Better cut off part of your wiener then.
No, something that person does not understand is the distinction between the law, right? The physical law of the Old Testament and the moral law of the Old Testament. the Ten Commandments are not the law of you have to practice circumcision and you have to go to the temple and do this at this time. They are moral laws that I don't think we're necessarily freed from.
I think that is a hermeneutic that is not internally supported by the scope of Scripture. That it's not necessarily wrong. That's a fine way to approach it. Okay, but to say that don't make any graven images, that's moral and not physical. That there's a physical aspect to that. There's a physical aspect to the Ten Commandments. They're not strictly just behavioral. And I don't think that that's a distinction that is internally made. So, not that you can't make it, but I don't know if that's like...
Jesus, when asked by the Pharisees, what is the greatest of the Ten Commandments, makes the distinction. The greatest of these is love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second greatest of these is love thy neighbor as you love thyself. So Jesus, as far as I can tell, seems to be perfectly fine with using the Ten Commandments as moral law, even during his time.
But he doesn't make a distinction between... He doesn't make those two categories that you did.
No, but he goes on record saying, I've come to fulfill the law and to free you from it. But he seems to be perfectly fine with using the Ten Commandments, which tells me that he has drawn a distinction, even if not clearly.
To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't think those are part of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, they are.
He says that everything else falls within them. That's the Shema, but I don't think the Shema is part of the Decalogue.
Am I insane?
Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether it the form of anything that is heaven above or in the earth beneath, etc. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. Neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife. Yeah, those aren't the Ten Commandments.
We should cut this out.
Yeah. No, leave it in.
I'm insane. No.
Get wrecked.
Feels bad, man.
Yeah, but so those aren't part of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah,
he's saying
you're
that
right.
all
you're
of,
right.
But the whole of the Ten Commandments and all the other laws fit within those two commands.
This is my fault for not knowing the Ten Commandments by heart, which I should.
Yeah. So, is suicide self-murder? That's what we're actually talking about. Is it self-murder?
I would still argue yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the Ten Commandments fall within the purview of love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, then I'd say they're still applicable to today.
Yeah.
Even if not necessarily quote-unquote law.
So I would tackle it from a slightly different angle than Bonhoeffer. I would say that if you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself and you hate yourself to the point of wanting to be dead, then you cannot fulfill the rest of the commandments of Christ, which is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And you apparently don't love yourself very much if you're willing to kill yourself. So that's the angle I would take from it. Just keeping... I'm not trying to draw a hard line between the Old and New Testament or anything. I'm just saying that I don't know Bonhoeffer's argument would hold water with someone who was wanting to be combative and be like, New Testament, bro, it's different. Well, you can make a similar argument from the New Testament, so that's what I would do.
Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to read this part of Scripture that I completely misquoted.
Yeah, dog, go for it.
I think it's good to correct myself and to learn. And I really should have known that. I feel like an idiot.
If we had a nickel for every time we said something dumb, we would be able to afford to pay Jesse more.
More than minimum wage, it's true. All right. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with your soul, and with your mind. And this is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So, I think that's why I was confusing myself and landed on, oh yeah, those are in the 10 Commandments, because he asks which commandments in the law is the greatest, and then he says that.
Yeah, you assumed the commandment.
My bad.
10 Commandments.
I should have known those by heart. My bad.
That was a fair bumble.
It happens.
Fine. It's fine.
But if in these two commandments, all of the law and prophets hang in those, I think it's fair to draw out of that, yes, the 10 Commandments are good and a reasonable thing to use.
I just get nervous because we're under the law of grace, as Holy Scripture teaches, and I get nervous when Christians start looking to the 10 Commandments and say, see, we have to follow these 10 things, because it is just one step to the right, and all of a sudden you're breaking the neck of an ox because it gored a guy, and then you have to wash your hands in a specific river and chant this thing because that's what Deuteronomy says to do. And like, hold up.
Yeah.
10 Commandments are good. And we don't have to follow the Old Testament law. We don't have to do that. It is baked into loving your neighbor. And if you love your neighbor and love your neighbor well,
you'll be following them anyway.
Fulfilling the law. So okay. I think that if done carelessly, pointing to the 10 Commandments carelessly can lead to a legalism that is incommiserate with the gospel. So that's just a little thing that I get skeeved out by. That said, back to the suicide thing, yeah, it's self-murder, probably. It's definitely a rejection of everything else.
Then not good.
And my heart goes out to the people that are struggling with that or have had a loved one take their own life. That's rough, bud. It's real rough.
So, is there a scenario in which it is permissible for the Christian? For example, if Joe is being shot at and I jump in front of the bullet to save Joe's life, in a sense that is a self-sacrificial suicide, right? Is that okay for me to do?
I'd say that it's required of you to do.
Ooh, okay. So
because that's
why is that categorically different than just suicide for the sake of suicide?
Because one, you're loving your neighbor as yourself. Because you'd want someone to jump in front of the bullet for you and save you.
Well,
probably.
I'm not sure I would.
You might be real noble and be like, no, just let me die.
To be like 100%, I'm not sure I would.
If there's like any amount of selfishness within yourself, and there probably is, there's part of you that would like someone else to take the bullet if they're willing to. Like, I mean, if you really want to get shot instead of me,
all right.
I mean, if that's really what you want, I'll let you. I'm not going to stop you, buddy. That's categorically different because you are loving your neighbor to the point of your own death versus the other one where you are hating yourself to the point of never wanting to see your neighbor again.
Yeah.
Those are two very different instances.
Okay, so let me ask you this. And I want to be clear. I'm not trying to make this political. I don't want to get into politics on this show, but something that's been going on for a while now is something like the Russia-Ukraine war. Are the people in Russia and Ukraine not your neighbor?
No, they're my neighbor.
So why don't you go to Russia or Ukraine and try to go save as many people as you can with the knowledge that that may entail self-sacrifice. Is that not loving your neighbor? And is that not your command from Christ?
I think that in this paper, I will argue that there are degrees of neighbor.
Okay.
And some of my neighbors are much closer. And those neighbors in particular are my wife. She's my closest neighbor.
It's
and
true.
In the words of Paul, if I don't take care of my closest neighbors, my family, then I am worse than an unbeliever.
Ooh.
So you have a duty to pray for the people of Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Gaza and wherever else there be war and strife. You have a duty to pray for them.
A lot of places.
Whole lot of places. And you have a very immediate duty to... It's like the spheres of influence, you know, where there's like the stuff that you can control, the stuff that you can't control but you can influence, and the stuff that you can neither control nor influence. You know, you got to have a bit of a prioritization and taxonomy for which neighbors you're going to prioritize. And some people, they might get it placed on their heart by the Holy Spirit to go to Russia or Ukraine and try and help, and more power to you. Go off. I be fruitful and be blessed and good luck, and I will pray for you. I might even give you $20 to send you on your way and help you out.
Okay.
But for me, that's not the neighbors that I need to focus on, I don't think.
Okay.
Because I got closer neighbors to really take care of, you know?
Okay.
If that's fair. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but it's my attempt at one.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. There's a level of neighborliness.
Yeah, they're all my neighbor, but the neighbor who is in front of me with a cardboard sign saying homeless, hungry, anything helps, they are more my neighbor in some way than the child in the cobalt mine in Uganda or wherever. I can't help that kid because he's all the way over there, but I can give the guy a $5.
Well, is it that you can't help that kid, or that it's more of an inconvenience for you?
I can't help everyone.
It's true.
There are 8 billion people.
It's true.
There are some people that I cannot help, and I would have to choose some people to not help to go help other people.
Okay.
So
morally and ethically, does that mean that we shouldn't be helping people like that?
Like what?
Like kids in coal mines in Uganda, or sweatshops in China making iPhones, or whatever, right? Does that mean that because unless you're living in those places, they're not your most neighborly neighbor, quote unquote, that we don't have a duty to help those people, to love those neighbors? Should we not be setting up organizations or funding places or funding people who want to do that, or that we should be sending people out to do that?
I mean, when the opportunity arises, sure, but couple things.
Okay.
One, I am finite.
Yes.
And have finite resources.
Correct.
Number 2, there will always be problems somewhere.
Yeah.
Can't fix it.
Yep.
I mean, we can make things better. We can help. But we're not going to make a utopia this side of eternity.
Yes.
Not going to happen. We're probably always going to have slavery somewhere. And we're probably always going to have war somewhere. And you can do some things to help alleviate that suffering, but there's only so much you can do. And lastly, does prayer do something?
I sure do think it does.
Okay, if prayer does something, well, it sure is a mercy to me that I can pray for folk that I can't help otherwise. That
Okay.
is a mercy to
So
us as much as it is to them that we can pray on their behalf.
if you lived in Uganda and there were kids in your local village that were being forced to work in coal mines, it would be your neighborly duty to do something about that.
I think so. Yeah.
But for your
Insofar as you
context
could.
that you do live in, there's only so much you can do about that.
For that specific
Yeah.
problem, there's only so much that I
Therefore,
could, I mean, I could try to do more, I suppose.
but ultimately, it's better left to the neighbors in that place. Is almost what you're getting at.
I don't know if better is the right word, but
Mhm.
practically it kind of has to be. Or, you could get a team of 20 people, a couple doctors, and
Yeah.
maybe some mercenaries together, and they could go out there and maybe do some good. Because you're going to need the mercenaries because people are going to shoot at you if you're there for very long and trying to get them to stop child labor.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. But contextually, you do what you can for the people that are close, and what you can do is probably more than what you think you can do.
Okay.
But you can't help everyone, and there you go.
Okay.
Can't help everybody.
I think that's fair.
And I know it probably sounds a little cold and callous that I'm like, oh, them kids over in Africa, I can't do anything for them. Get wrecked, kid. But, like, it's not what I'm trying to say. That might be how it sounds. My heart goes out to them. It really does. But I can't
Yeah.
help them. And even if I were helping them, why are you helping the kids in the cobalt mines when there are concentration camps in China that they're holding Muslims in? Okay, well, now I'm going to go and fight concentration camps in China. And, oh, well, now I've got to go and help in Ukraine. And now, it's like,
Yeah.
pick like 4 out of the 8 billion people out there and love those 4 people really, really hard. How about that? If we all did that, we'd be doing pretty good. There's a homeless guy that I see a lot, and I give him a bottle of water every time, which isn't much,
But it's something.
but it's something. And I'll probably, when it starts getting cold, if he's still around, I'll start giving him like socks and gloves and stuff. But for right now, it's bottles of water because it's hot outside.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to love that one homeless guy really well every time I see him, because he's predictably on the same like 3 corners when I'm at work. So love that one guy really, really well, and we'll see where that gets me. I don't know.
Okay. Man.
Can't help everybody.
Yeah. Okay. What to talk about next? There's so much to talk about.
Morals, ethics.
Ethics. There's so much.
I've got some stuff about violence that we could talk about, or what have you.
Sure.
If you want.
What do you got?
I feel like we settled the suicide thing.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Don't. It's bad. I would take the stance it's a sinful act, or at the very least, it is the result of a sinful nature and therefore not good. Seek help.
Yeah, I think Chesterton.
If you need help, seek it.
I think Chesterton's really onto something, that it's the rejection of everything. And I pinky promise that there's something out there in the great wide world that God said it is good, that you won't want to reject when you find. There's lots of good, beautiful, and true things out there.
All right. What do you got? What do you want to talk about? Because I've still got plenty of more notes, but we've got so much time.
So this is going to take us down the track of loving your neighbor and violence.
Okay.
How those things might be related sometimes. Okay. Does love of neighbor ever require unpleasant action?
Unpleasant.
Unpleasant.
Not even necessarily violent, quote
Just
unquote,
unpleasant.
but unpleasant.
Do you sometimes have to do things that are unpleasant in order to love your neighbor?
Absolutely. Without question.
Categorically, I would even say.
Yes.
Does love of neighbor ever require violent action?
I suppose that depends on how you define violence.
We defined it earlier.
Yes, in the way that we have defined
The
violence.
use of physical force, coercion, or intimidation to bend someone else's will towards yours.
I'm kind of torn on this one, because the way that you've defined violence is, I don't know, it's, to me, I'm thinking, do I have to impose my will or force it upon somebody in order to love them in a given situation? Do I have to? And if the answer is no, then no, violence is not necessary to love your neighbor. So I guess that's kind of the starting point there is that a necessary part of loving your neighbor? Imposing your will upon the neighbor by force.
Or coercion.
Or coercion.
Or coercion.
So define coercion for me.
Dang.
There are so many semantics we have to talk about, man.
The use of words to specifically the use of weaselly words to convince.
Weaselly words.
Weaselly
huh?
words.
Okay.
So I think convincing someone of something is different than coercing.
Okay.
Because if I coerce you, it's like, sure would be a shame if something happened to that computer you got. And then I like knock over a book and I'm like, hey, but you know, if you give me protection money, then your computer's probably going to be safe. It's insurance, you know?
Uh-huh.
That's coercion. It's kind of weaselly,
Yep.
kind of. But if I'm like, hey, man, tornadoes happen.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice computer. I'd hate to see you lose out on your really nice computer through a tornado or something. I happen to know about this insurance policy. Have you considered looking into that? Then I might convince you to get insurance. And that's different than coercing you into it. Is that fair, or am I
Yes.
being too
No, I think
pedantic?
that's absolutely fair. So violence would include coercion, but not convincing, is what you're saying.
In my definition of violence,
Then
yeah.
I might make the argument that violence is not necessary to love the neighbor, and we can discuss this, and maybe I'll change my mind by the end of this.
I would make the argument that sometimes violence is necessary to love my neighbor.
So let's
In your example of someone beating the crap out of someone,
yes.
and I come up and I'm like, hey, Tommy, quit beating the crap out of Joe over here. Come on. You want to go to prison for that? You want to go back to the slammer? Come on. And that's like kind of convincing. And Tommy's like, I don't care. I'm going to kill Joe. And then he puts his hands around Joe's throat and starts choking him. If I am to love Joe, who is my neighbor, I'm going to have to do something to Tommy, who is also my neighbor. I'm going to have to perhaps physically restrain Tommy.
Okay.
I might have to hit Tommy in the back of the head with a brick. Not kill him, but hit him with a brick, because Tommy's a big guy. You know, you gotta or like in the case of a sexual assault, you see someone grabbing somebody and trying to pull him into a van. You might have to intervene or like and physically stop them. In the story I told in the last episode about my pastor breaking up that fight with the two guys, he didn't have to do any violence. He just like, hey, guys, stop. And they were like, yeah, okay, we'll stop. And that was enough. He was able to convince them. But if someone's really set on hurting somebody, you might have to do more than just a, hey, buddy, cut it out. And
Listen here, bucko.
yeah, you might have to be intimidating. You might have to make a threat. You might have to...
Let me pose you the question. If you're seeing a fight happen,
Okay.
and you decide I have to physically restrain one of these fighting participants in order to love my neighbor, that may be loving to the guy who you're not restraining, is that loving to the neighbor whom you are restraining?
Yes, it's sparing him from sin.
Mmm.
It would be unloving for me to let Tommy choke the life out of Joe, to be like, hey man, I can't like impose myself on Tommy. I just gotta let him like do his thing. You know? I don't want to like be that guy that tells you that what you're doing is wrong. No. Tommy, you are going to go to prison for the rest of your life. You might get the chair. You got a wife, you got 2 kids. Put Joe down, or I'm going to beat the crap out of you with this brick.
Why the brick, man?
Because Tommy's a big guy.
You're so set on the brick.
Tommy is 6'4", and I am 5'8". I can't fight Tommy barehanded. He'll kill me.
And maybe that's okay.
But after he kills me, he still goes to prison. So I've not helped anyone. The end result has stayed the same. Dang, I had something I was going to say. So here's a real world example.
Okay.
One time I was driving home from work, and I had my windows rolled down.
Yeah.
And as I'm driving, I come up on this shopping center that I live nearby. You know the one.
Yep.
And I'm driving alongside, and I see this little girl running from this fellow. And he, like, grabs her. And she's, like, yelling and crying and says, put me down, put me down, put me down. And I hear it because I've got my windows down.
Yeah.
So I, like, peel into this parking lot because I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And I, like, whip into a parking spot, throw my thing in park, and I, like, hop out. And she's like, to go home. And then I was like, okay, we're good. But until then, for about 30 seconds, I was ready to go and show some righteous love to this fella because I thought that's what might be required.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was going to do something.
Yeah.
So I do think loving your neighbor sometimes requires you to act and to act quickly, and sometimes the action needs to be a violent one because that's what the situation demands. Maybe it doesn't have to be violent, but maybe violent is the only thing you can think to do.
Yeah.
And it's better to do something that causes some amount of harm than to do nothing that doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Okay, you know what?
So
I am okay with that. And this is perhaps a great time to get into this discussion is what level of violence is acceptable
next
for the
question
Christian?
that I have. So
what level of violence is okay for the Christian before it's no longer acceptable?
yeah, the next question in my notes is, does that extend to killing?
And that is kind of one of the biggest things I wanted to touch on for this big discussion is how far can violence extend for the Christian before it's not okay, and is killing within that purview? And if so, when and when not? So let's preface this. We're going to be talking about some very, very dark subjects. We're going to be getting into some very sensitive topics here.
And for legal reasons, everything I'm about to say is a joke.
Okay.
For legal reasons.
Got it.
Okay? If you follow.
If you are not comfortable talking about situations that we're going to discuss right now, such as, but not limited to, school shootings, violent acts, that kind of thing, you may want to reconsider listening. I'm just going to be 100% honest.
Yeah, and if you got, maybe you're playing this in your car with the kids in the back seat, so we're getting dark.
Maybe don't.
I mean, we already had like a 20-minute conversation about suicide, so.
Yeah, so just a completely fair warning to you. That's where we're headed here. So, I think there is certainly a permissible level of violence in order to love your neighbor and to protect the sanctity of life. Mm-hmm. That there has to be, right? So let me preface this with, I think we need to lay something out here. Feel free to disagree with me, William, and I might call you a heretic. Might. The human life is the most valuable thing that we have apart from God. God is the most important thing, full stop. God is the most important thing that we have. Number 2, in the totem pole of things that are valuable and important to us, is the human life. I'm making that distinction because God was willing to send himself incarnate to die for us that we might have eternal life with him, because we mattered that much to God, even though we didn't have to. That tells me human life is incredibly important to God. I believe, apart from God, human life is the most important thing we have. Is that something you can get on board with?
I would yes and.
Okay.
Quick caveat before
Okay.
we go any further,
Yes.
because this is a fact that's going to color a lot of the things that I think surrounding this question.
Okay.
All y'all gonna die.
Correct.
All y'all. Everybody gonna do it.
Everybody.
Everybody. Since everybody's gonna die, yes, preserving human life is very, very important, and even the most important, right?
Sure.
If cutting down a tree to burn for fuel will save a human, I'm cutting down the freaking tree.
Yes.
If killing any animal in any way, shape, or form will preserve a human life, I will do that.
Absolutely.
I will choke a puppy to death if it saves a human.
Mhm.
Like, I'll do it with my bare hands. Sure, give me the puppy. Like, I don't care. Well, compared to a human,
Yeah, I care, but not in comparison to the context.
I'm not going to enjoy it.
No.
That would be weird. But I sure do like choking puppies.
That's a blooper reel. All right.
No, leave that in. Like choking them. Dead puppies make me laugh. But, like, compared to a human, it's not that important to me.
Yes.
Like, it's magnitudes of difference.
Magnitude's lesser.
Magnitudes lesser. In part because I believe that humans were made in the image and likeness of God.
And animals were not.
And we're all going to die.
Yes.
I think it's Alexander Camus who says that knowing we're all going to die makes life a joke. I think Alexander Camus was a godless bastard.
Wow. I don't know who that is, but okay.
He was a French philosopher, and godless bastard is probably an understatement. He was
Okay.
not a virtuous man.
Sure.
I'm not taking a Camusian stance that knowing we're all going to die means it doesn't matter, man. I'm just prefacing
That is a truth.
we're all going to die. We're all going to die, okay? So, keeping that truth in mind, now we can discuss whether or not Christians are allowed to kill.
Okay. So, those are the things we have laid out is we are all going to die.
We're all going to die, and humans are more important than
Human
anything.
life is debatably the most important thing that we have apart from God. Or we can work within those contexts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, let's kind of work our way up the scale of violent act until we decide it's no longer permissible and see where we land. So, let's just start with a scenario. For example, like we've already discussed, person A is beating the hell out of person B. Is it permissible to restrain that person?
Yeah,
I would
for
say
sure.
yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Is it permissible for me to harm that person in the process?
Yeah.
I would agree.
I used to do martial arts.
Yep.
And occasionally my instructor had a phrase he liked to use with us. He said, "It is better to hurt than to maim, and it is better to maim than to kill."
Mm.
He was like, look, if you can put a guy in an arm bar and that's enough, put him in the arm bar.
Yeah.
If that's not going to be enough, break his arm. If you have to, then maybe choke him to death. If you have to. But make sure you have to before you
Which
do
is
it.
a thing that you're teacher taught you to do, which is a fun story.
Yeah, so it wasn't that one. It was a different one. So
Oh, okay.
I did a martial art for a really long time, and I got a black belt in it. And then I went and I did a different martial art for a very short time. And my instructor for that other martial art knew that I had a black belt. So he goes, "You want to learn something cool?" And I was like, "Sure." And he goes, "I'm telling you this because I know you have a black belt." And then he demonstrated how to break someone's neck the right way, air quotes around that. And he was like, "And that's how you break a neck. You got to," and I'm not going to share how to do it because it's actually more technical than you'd expect. But he showed me how to do it. And I was like, "Oh, I am cursed with knowledge. Thank you for that, Carl. His name was Carl.
That story makes me laugh every time. That's just so funny to me.
Yeah, so
anyway,
yes,
so
you go through that. You hurt the guy, and then if you have to, maybe you break his arm, or you kick him in the back of the knee and choke him out if you have to.
Yeah, and we're gonna keep running through the scenario here. In the fist fight scenario, let's say let's even make this more ambiguous. Okay, for the sake of really getting into the nitty-gritty. You don't know either of the involved parties.
Dang.
You walk into this situation, you don't know who started the fight or why. All you know is they are in a fist fight. You select one of the fellas at random to restrain. That's not enough. You don't know the context. Is it okay for you to break the dude's arm? You don't know why they're in this fight. You don't know if this guy started it or not. You don't know what the context is. All you know is you are not strong enough to physically restrain this guy.
Doubt it. Strong as heck.
Let's assume this is Eddie Hall, the
All right,
world-class
Well, if it's Eddie
lifter.
Hall, I'm not getting involved. I'm staying far away. The man weighs 400 pounds, Ryan. He deadlifted 500 kilograms. That's 1,100 pounds, Ryan.
It is.
He is the world's strongest man, Ryan. He incline dumbbell pressed with like 300-pound dumbbells, one in each hand.
Yeah.
I'm not getting involved with Eddie Hall. He could crush me like a grape.
Okay, well, let's assume you try to restrain fella A,
Just big guy.
and you can't.
Can't. He breaks out.
Is it okay for you to break the dude's arm when you don't know the context of this fist fight? You don't know who started it. All you know is you're trying to stop the fist fight, and you can't restrain guy A.
So unless it looks like life is in danger, like if one of them is knocked out and the other guy continues to beat him, then I'm going to try and put him in a sleeper hold or something.
Yeah.
'Cause that's a thing I know how to do. Not everyone does, but it's a thing I could do. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe stop the guy from. I would meet the violence with equal violence to stop it. Or like maybe a step down from equal. So it looks like he's going to kill him, and I'll break his arm.
Okay.
It looks like he's going to knock him out, then I might like restrain him or put him in an arm bar or something. If they're just slugging on each other and it's not looking like one's going to harm the other full stop, I might, hey, fellas, come on, fellas.
So
push them apart.
That's where you would draw the line in that scenario is, I might break his arm.
Maybe.
I might maybe break his arm.
I would respond with a step down from whatever he's doing.
All right.
If he successfully kills one guy and then he turns and starts going after another guy, then that big man's mad dog. We need to
put him down.
Put him to sleep at least.
Yeah.
I got my brick.
Yeah.
Hey, Tommy.
Your pocket brick.
You ready for this here brick? Pocket
brick.
Yeah, I keep one in my pocket every time. Just pull out a brick.
Okay, so let's get into some more sensitive scenarios.
All right.
Let's talk about active shooting event.
Okay.
But let's just say not even like a school or a church, just like a shopping mall.
Mm-hmm.
Active shooter. You, William, are armed with a firearm, and
as I frequently am.
Yes. So I want to preface this as well. William and I are both firearm owners and carriers.
You don't need a concealed carry permit in the state of Ohio.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. which was real convenient because I had one when I lived in Georgia, and
It didn't transfer.
it didn't. Well, there's reciprocal laws, but as a no longer Georgia resident, I wasn't sure if it would still apply.
Yes. Now,
But I don't need a
with
permit,
those
so we
new
can just
laws in
carry.
Ohio, though, that does not give you permission to carry everywhere. Particularly, obviously, like government buildings, not okay. But specifically for schools and churches, even with these new carrying laws, you must get explicit permission from the church or school to carry on their premises.
Yeah. So we'll say this happens in a Walmart. So that
Somewhere
way-
you can legally carry
Walmart, you're allowed to
with
carry
or
in.
without a permit.
Yeah.
That's you and I are both frequent carriers. I carry a firearm.
Yep.
I'm at a Walmart, and there's a shooting.
Anyway, I started.
What level of violence for the Christian is permissible within this context?
Well, I'm gonna be real honest. With my 380 that I got, I probably shouldn't pull that thing out because I can't hit the broadside of a barn with it. I need to get like a 9mm.
I carry a 9mm.
I need to get something with better sights on it because my 380 just has like iron sights. Maybe I could get like the little glow dots that stick on.
Get either like I carry a Glock 19. It's my everyday carry.
Yeah.
Wonderful compact gun. If you want something even smaller that's still like 9mm, look into like a Glock 23 or something.
Yeah.
It's substantial but compact.
My dad has like this Yugoslavian-made 22 semi-automatic pistol that's really sleek.
Yeah.
And it has a tendency to jam because it's Yugoslavian, but it's a very compact pistol, and it shoots really well. And I think I might get one of those in the near future.
In any case,
Something like anyway,
let's just assume in this scenario you're carrying, say, like something like a Glock 19, a usable, reliable firearm.
Felt that I could hit the guy.
Mm-hmm.
If I felt like I had a
Pistol
good shot.
whip him?
No, like if I had a good shot.
Oh, okay.
If he's not in the line of sight, I'm gonna scurry out of there and hopefully get out alive.
Okay, so your first reaction is not necessarily respond, it's escape.
If I have, well, I don't know, man. On one hand, I want to be like real macho and be like, no, man, I'd run toward the gunfire. I don't know if I'd run toward the gunfire. That would be scary. That would be really scary.
But from a moral and ethical standpoint, what's the right thing to do?
I think that if you're a good shot and you have a good piece on you, and someone starts shooting people in the Walmart, you go and you put that guy down. You put one right between the eyes, and you do it without hesitation, and you never lose a wink of sleep over it. I think that's the right thing to do because human life is our highest good.
Yes.
And I preserve more human life by killing the guy.
So here's the argument I want to propose to you.
Trolley problem? We get into the trolley
Not yet.
problem?
We're going to get to that.
Because this is kind of the trolley problem.
We are going to get to
but
that.
with guns.
Is the active shooter's life any less valuable than the people's lives that he is taking?
I don't think that it's a question of value, per se. I think it's a... I think that justice and virtue demand that I do something.
Sure.
And if I can do something that doesn't kill him, okay, do that. If you can't do something that doesn't kill him, I'm 50 feet away, there's no way I can close the gap before he shoots me with his rifle.
Mm-hmm.
Bang, bang. I can't. If he's like right beside me and he hasn't seen me and I'm behind him, then maybe I don't have to shoot him. Maybe I can reach around, grab the barrel, pull it up, and then like put him in a sweet chokehold and body slam him. Maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
But justice demands that I do something.
Okay, so we talked about moral culpability.
Mm-hmm.
By shooting the active shooter, whether or not that is the quote-unquote virtuous thing to do, which we could argue about all day.
And I think it is. I think it is
Either way, you become morally culpable for the action you take one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? What if that isn't the virtuous thing to do? What if that was the wrong move ethically, and now you are morally culpable for shooting that guy?
Then I throw myself upon the grace of Christ.
Mm.
Because let's talk about the trolley.
Okay.
It's immediately relevant to this.
All right, so trolley problem. There is a trolley. I'm going to lay this out for anyone who doesn't know it. There's a trolley and there's a split track. It is currently headed towards the one side of the track, the right side, upon which there are 5 individuals who are tied down to the track.
Yep. Yeah, you're right.
5 individuals tied to the track. On the other side of that split rail is a single individual tied to the track. It's headed for the 5, but there is a lever that you have the option to pull to change the track to head towards the one person. Do you pull the lever?
Yeah, so then the question is it more moral of you to do nothing and let more people die, or to do something but be directly responsible for one person dying?
And this is obviously a little different than like the scenario we were just talking about, because the one person on the track is not an active shooter.
Right.
So it's a little different.
But, if you go through an intro to philosophy class, this is going to come up. And
so
the professor will be like, by show of hands, who pulls the lever? And half the class won't, and half the class will.
Yep.
And then they'll say, okay, well, what if the one person is a convicted animal rapist?
Yep.
And then everyone raises their hands. And...
So let's start running through a few of these trolley problems. So
okay.
Basic trolley problem, 5 random people, 1 random person on the other side. Do you pull the lever?
Yes.
I would take the stance of no.
James tells us that sin, I forget the exact wording that James uses, but he tells us that sin can be things that you do that are wrong. It can also be
not doing the right thing.
Not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And just because you do nothing doesn't mean that you're squeaky clean. You didn't take responsibility, so you're not directly responsible for the one guy's death, but that doesn't mean that you're off the hook for the 5 people's death. You didn't beat the crap out of the homeless guy, but you never helped him either.
But the question is, as it was set up, I did not tie those people to the track.
Yeah, but
I stumble upon this.
The thing
by
is,
chance,
you either
right?
choose to be passive, or you take action.
By being passive, am I morally culpable for the 5 people that I did not tie to the track and condemn to death?
I think that on some level,
I'm not entirely convinced that that's the case,
and that's fine. But this is similar to: do you kill the active shooter, or do you do nothing and let him keep shooting more people until the cops show up?
Mm-hmm.
I think, at least, I am not saying this is the right thing for everyone to do.
Yeah.
I'm saying for me, I think I'm always going to choose to do the thing.
Yeah.
Whether or not the thing is the right thing to do, I'm not sure, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do something. I'm going to pull the lever, and maybe it turns out that the 5 people were all pedophiles and the one person was actually like a monk or something. Yeah. I'm sorry. I tried. I did something. It was the wrong thing, but I tried.
So
you're not pious inaction. Isn't a free ride to doing your good because you were piously inactive. I think it's important to give it a shot, and maybe giving it a shot means actually shooting someone.
So,
maybe. I don't know.
There's a couple things I want to touch on here.
Sure, go ahead.
That Bonhoeffer had to say in Ethics.
Touch them all.
On this particular problem. He didn't discuss the trolley problem because that wasn't really a thing back in like the 30s, I don't think. But what he said applies, I think, directly to this. So Bonhoeffer makes the argument: the willing and knowing taking of human life is always wrong.
Innocent human life.
Innocent human life.
He specifies
yes,
that it's
innocent human life. So In the trolley problem, if we're assuming the 5 people on one track are all innocent, and the one person on the other track is also morally innocent, you pulling the lever would be sinful because you are making the choice to do that. You are now morally culpable for condemning that one person to death, whereas you are not condemning the 5 people to death because you did not put them in that situation. That is now in God's hands.
Well,
you are morally culpable for the one person's death because you made the choice to condemn that person to death.
And there's a video game that you've not played much of called Skyrim.
Yeah.
In Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls V, there's a group of assassins that you can become a member of. They're called the Dark Brotherhood. Anyway, we'll take our moral philosophy from the Dark Brotherhood from a fictitious game.
Okay.
There's like this creepy door that you have to have a password to get into, which is where their lair is. And the creepy door asks you, what is life's greatest illusion? And the right answer is innocence. And then the door opens and you can get into the creepy lair.
Okay.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, as we established, everybody's going to die.
Yes.
If I can preserve more life for more time, I'm going to try and do that. With the knowledge that even if that guy might die. But he was going to do that anyway. Not to be callous, but to be true. He was going to die anyway, and I have saved net 4 people, which is really utilitarian of me.
That's extremely utilitarian.
But if human life is the most valuable thing, 4 human lives are valuable things. And therefore, by a factor, to the 4th power, you've preserved the most valuable thing.
But is Bonhoeffer right? By pulling the lever, and again, he doesn't talk about the trolley problem specifically, but applying his moral ethics to this, by pulling the lever, you have become morally culpable for condemning that one person to death knowingly and willingly. And Bonhoeffer says that's sinful. That's not acceptable for the Christian.
Well, this brings us back to a question that we asked not terribly long ago. How much sin is allowed in the life of a Christian? And which sins is allowed in the life of a Christian? And why is this sin different than the other sins? Why is this sin totally untenable for us to have when other sins are also totally untenable for us to have, and yet we have them anyway? What do you do? And I'm going to say, with very little hesitation and an eye towards repentance if need be, that I'm going to do something. I don't know if it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do something.
Okay.
Because does that move me closer to the highest good, right? Would that bring me closer to the summa bona? Is that... There's the Latin term for the highest good.
Yeah.
And every time I say anything in Latin, I get afraid that I'm saying the wrong thing or that I'm conjugating it weird. But I think it's summa bona.
Okay.
I think. But whatever. The highest good.
Yeah.
Does it move me closer to the highest good to pull the lever, or does it move me further away? I don't know. I don't know that it's clear that it does either of those.
Yeah.
But, I'm sure it does one of them, but I don't know which one.
Yeah. Okay. I want to read a paragraph out of Ethics here.
Yeah, go ahead.
And see what your thoughts are on what Bonhoeffer has to say here. You have read this paragraph before.
Well, but put it fresh in my brain hole.
I had you read this already. I think this is interesting, though. Among free independent persons, any conscious injury to the body of another constitutes the destruction of the first natural right of man. It means that he is in principle deprived of all his rights and that natural life is destroyed. The first right of natural life consists in the safeguarding of the life of the body against arbitrary killing. One must speak of arbitrary killing wherever innocent life is deliberately destroyed. But in this context, any life is innocent which does not engage in a conscious attack upon the life of another, and which cannot be convicted of any criminal deed that is worthy of death. This means that the killing of the enemy in war is not arbitrary killing. For even if he is not personally guilty, he is nevertheless consciously participating in the attack of his people against the life of my people, and he must share in bearing the consequences of the collective guilt. And of course, there is nothing arbitrary about the killing of a criminal who has done injury to the life of another, nor yet about the killing of civilians in war, so long as it is not directly intended, but is only an unfortunate consequence of a measure which is necessary on military grounds. But it would not be arbitrary to kill defenseless prisoners or wounded men who can no longer defend themselves, guilty of an attack on my life. It is arbitrary to kill an innocent man out of passion or for the sake of some advantage. All deliberate killing of innocent life is arbitrary.
Can I respond to that with a paragraph from St. Augustine?
You may.
And we're at the second hour mark, so maybe after this paragraph by Augustine, we take 5, and then we come back and and talk about these things?
All right.
Okay, so this is a quote from his City of God. There are, however, certain expectations...
Wow.
Words.
Words.
I can't read. There are, however, certain exceptions to the law against killing made by the authority of God himself. There are some whose killing God orders, either by a law or by an express command to a particular person at a particular time. In fact, one who owes a duty of obedience to the giver of the command does not himself kill. He is an instrument, a sword in its user's hand. For this reason, the commandment forbidding killing was not broken by those who had waged wars on the authority of God, or those who have imposed the death penalty on criminals when representing the authority of the state in accordance with the laws of the state. The justest and most reasonable source of power, that is the state. When Abraham was ready to kill his son, so far from being blamed for cruelty, he was praised for his devotion. It was not an act of crime, but of obedience. One is justified in asking whether Jephthah is to be regarded as obeying a command of God in killing his daughter when he had vowed to sacrifice to God the first thing he met when returning victorious from battle. And when Samson destroyed himself, suicide, with his enemies by the demolition of the building, this can only be excused on the grounds that the Spirit, which performed miracles through him, secretly ordered him to do so. With the exception of these killings prescribed generally by a just law, or specifically commanded by God himself, the source of justice, anyone who kills a human being, whether himself or anyone else, is involved in a charge of murder.
So, it seems to be the case that Augustine and Bonhoeffer aren't that far off from each other.
No, and let's take 5 and then pick up with that, or do you want to talk about that? And then...
Well, this will be the end of this particular episode,
Yeah.
so let's finish out this line of thought real quick.
I think that they're pretty closely aligned, but Augustine allows for direct commandments from God to kill a person that Bonhoeffer would categorize as innocent.
So,
Because Bonhoeffer's definition of innocent would have included Isaac.
Yes, although Bonhoeffer doesn't specify that, at least not in this book, as far as I can remember. I don't think Bonhoeffer would have an issue with amening that, though, saying if God commands you to kill,
yeah, but
obviously.
But he does not say that in his ethics.
He doesn't say that, but my understanding of his theology and of his morality, I don't think he would have an issue with that. I think he would be on board with that.
So I think Bonhoeffer would say, do not pull the lever, because it would be arbitrary killing. But I think Augustine would say, do pull the lever, because God commands us to love our neighbors, and there are more neighbors on track 1 to love than track 2. I think Augustine might be pro pulling the lever.
Yes.
And I think Bonhoeffer would not be. So even though they're saying very similar things, I think that distinction of where Augustine includes commandments from God gives some extra leeway there compared to Bonhoeffer's definition, which is kind of counterintuitive
Yeah, and to kind of close out this thought here, and this particular episode, I'm on board with that. I agree that God being the ultimate judge and the ultimate arbitrator of what is moral and ethical, because there is objective truth. If God commands me to kill somebody, it is my duty to follow that command. I think that is not something that the Christian can argue, not in good faith.
And for the record, he's probably not going to tell you.
No,
it's
but he has, and we've seen it.
He has.
We see that play out in Scripture.
In your personal life?
Probably not.
Probably not.
But maybe.
Maybe.
But maybe.
Maybe, but probably not.
If a voice from the heavens comes down in a booming voice and says, kill this guy, you may want to consider that.
I think it's John who says, trust not every spirit, but only the one that confesses that Jesus the Christ came in the flesh. Mm-hmm. All others are the Antichrist. Or something to that effect. So don't just...
So, yes.
Be careful with disembodied voices telling you to kill people.
Yes, but I don't think it's reasonable for any Christian to say, if God tells you kill a guy, don't kill the guy. I don't think there's room for that.
Moreover, I've known people who are real pacifistic.
Yep.
Who would go so far as to say, well, God would never. Well,
not necessarily.
I don't know about never. So how about this? When the active shooter walks into the Walmart, real quick, as I'm pulling out my Glock 19, I go, Lord, what you think? Based off of how...
See what God tells you.
See if in the moment the good Lord tells me, right between the eyes, baby.
Yep, because... And I think that might be the right move, honestly.
Yeah,
because,
well, I mean, why not? Pray continually, right?
Yeah, and God being the ultimate authority on morals and ethics, if God tells you it's the right thing to do to take life, you take life. And if he tells you it is not the right thing to do, you do not do it.
And this is really utilitarian of me, and I don't usually like utilitarianism, but, whatever.
Yeah.
The preservation of life is, I think, generally a very, very good thing that should be pursued. And if you waste the active shooter and save many lives by doing that, and if you pull the lever of the trolley and save 4 lives by doing that net, that might be the right thing to do. I don't know. If you're a professor of philosophy, shoot us an email and say you're wrong, and then I'll capitulate. But right now,
okay.
But take 5.
We'll take 5.
All right. There you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Theology-ish. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review. It helps other people find us so that they can listen to the conversation. If you have any questions or comments for us, don't hesitate to send us an email at theology-ish@gmail.com. Thanks.